Okay, and just want to start off by saying hello and welcome to this session on reporting on race, culture, and social issues as well. I'll just do a quick round of intros as well, just for everyone as well. When the thing that I want to say as well though, is that we're streaming live as well, though. But if you do have any questions, then feel free to put them on the message chat here, or feel free to open up your cameras and mics by putting your hand up as well. That's absolutely fine. I'll start off by introducing myself. So my name's Chris Chohan. I'm one of the trustees here at the SPA. And I'm going to get the panel to introduce themselves in a second as well. But just say that we've got Shahed Ezaydi, we've got Christine Ochefu, and we've got Shayma Bakht as well. And I'm just going to hand it over to you to take it away and tell us a bit about yourselves.
I can go first as I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm Shahed. I'm the deputy editor of Aurelia magazine and also a freelance journalist. I've been a freelance journalist for the past 2 years and an editor for, I think, the past 6 months.
I don't mind going next. So my name's Shayma Bakht. I am predominantly an investigative journalist, but I work as a producer at some radio newsrooms, and I also am currently working on launching a new television news programme. Yeah, and I also, aside from that, I'm a voluntary editor at Ezaydi magazine, which is quite relevant to this chat. So that's me.
And yeah, so I'm Christine, so I'm like a freelance writer, editor, journalist, copywriter. I kind of specialize in topics around things like music, race, pop culture, the media, their intersections. And then I do a lot of work around tracing like Black history as well. So I've done some stuff. I work at like a couple of places and stuff like The Guardian, W Magazine, etc., kind of thing. And I've done some editing for Black Ballad as well. I've been doing this for around 2 years or so, I think. So.
Thanks very much there as well. So I suppose the first question, for you on the panel as well, though, is that it's been quite a challenging year and a bit for so many reasons as well. And I think what I wanted to kick things off with is by asking in your areas and talking about race, culture, and social issues. What would you say the biggest topics and areas have been in the last year and a bit?
I mean, everything's been impacted by coronavirus, obviously, and because of that, there's been a lot of, I think, more interrogation into the disparities in healthcare. That's something that I've picked up on a lot, but whether it's, it's impacted every part of society, really. So businesses too, that's come up a lot, how certain areas are being impacted more with COVID. Don't know about what the other guys think.
Yeah, I don't mind going next. So I would say it's kind of, so obviously my areas mainly tend to be music, like entertainment and pop culture, and my work isn't necessarily so massively reactive to like societal events all the time. But yeah, obviously like the music industry has been hit massively by coronavirus and COVID, how it's impacted like touring, how streaming, like how people are kind of interacting with people in terms of artists and trying to get their music out. So I'd say, yeah, that's been a big thing really. But again, I think it's an area that it's kind of like, well, a lot of the topics that I cover there aren't massively so relevant to what's going on in the outside world all the time. But I'd say like that has been a major thing. So I kind of agree with Shayma there, sort of thing.
I would also just add, as I focus on politics, so it's very much been a strange old year and a half of politics, and it's definitely shone a light on a lot of marginalised issues that have obviously got a little bit worse in the not even a little bit worse, a lot worse in the pandemic. Trans issues, race issues, homophobia, anything really that's been impacted by 11 years of a Tory government. So that's the kind of area that I've picked up on. And also just generally how lockdowns affected us all and how it's affected us all in different ways. Like lockdowns affected marginalised communities in different ways. That's definitely shone light on it as well. So Yeah, definitely. That's what I've seen in the political world anyway.
And in terms of, you know, the actual kind of like reporting and the way we tell and deliver our stories as well, I think over the last year and a bit, one of the, it goes without saying as well, the more prominent stories, issues was obviously around George Floyd, the case, and then Black Lives Matter that, transcended, globally as well. Though. So in terms of kind of like reporting along those lines, how have the three of you, found telling those stories for all of those communities and the people they impacted?
So, I mean, I think I wanted to kind of take a step back from being a main voice talking about the George Floyd protests, just because I think that predominantly was a time for Black writers to get their voices heard. But while that was all happening, I was working at LBC actually, and because at that time I was freelance, I was working across lots of different newsrooms, and I just wanted to make sure, as one of the few, I mean, obviously this is something that I'm sure the others will mention later too, the newsrooms are so undiverse. So at that time, all that we were speaking about were topics to do with racial injustice and things like that. But I was probably one of the only people of colour in that newsroom. So did find that I had to kind of give some directions, I guess, to some of the more higher up people in the newsroom, just in terms of, we need to be talking about this and we need to be, sensitive to this sort of coverage. Yeah, and then in terms of like how COVID impacted that, a lot of, it just meant that actually I found that we had more access to people because we, people who might have been regional, I'm talking about speakers, talking on these sort of topics, we were able to invite them over Zoom links and things like that. And so we actually got more diversity, I'd say, during that time, just because the change in technology meant that there are more voices that could be heard. Yeah.
Personally, I would say, again, it has impacted my work slightly, but probably not in the way that people would expect, kind of thing. So again, like I'm freelance, so a lot of my work is done kind of independently. I'm not really working within the newsroom sort of thing. But talking with artists, talking with musicians, talking with people like in the entertainment sector, especially because a lot of the people that I do tend to be Black artists. It's almost been that I found almost like an underlying pressure sometimes from, maybe people commissioning work or people wanting to, get stories out there, to have that sort of angle or have that sort of spin like added into stories, even when it originally wouldn't really be there. I think that, as I said, my work is in the entertainment sector, so it's not always, Black artists do have opinions on these things and do have ideas about it, but it's not necessarily always the forefront of their work. It's not something that they necessarily always want to talk about or should have to talk about. And I think it's quite interesting how that's brought up as a really primary thing for people to be commenting on, even when it's not necessarily their lane. Or even as a journalist, I feel that same way. So I just think it's quite, that's something I'd noticed. But again, in terms of my reporting, it's not, those kind of political developments aren't something that I was massively covering, so I can't really speak to that, so to speak. But yeah, I'd say that's how it impacted my own work.
And I would say the same as Shayma, in the fact that I also, I did have people reaching out, and I just think that speaks to how the industry works, is that I'm not Black, so I'm not the one that you should be reaching out to write on these things, like opinion or political commentary. And I just think that speaks to the industry and how that works. Like, there's this brown person, let's just ask her to speak on it. Whereas actually, I don't have that lived experience, so I'm definitely the wrong person to be reaching out to. But yeah, I definitely also took a step back and just amplified other people's work instead, because in the end, their voices need to be heard over mine.
And actually those they're kind of like really good points in terms of where I want to lead the next bit of this kind of like topic in conversation as well. So how, can we, as an industry, kind of like move on from like the three of you have said, there as well, though, if we're talking about specific, say for example, if it's to do with uh, black people, for example, or Indian people or Asian people or whatever it is as well, depending on what the story is. How can we move on from basically just contacting, say, a group of people? The usual group of people that you're going to contact because it's on this particular topic. How can we move on from that and make it a bit more of a diverse storytelling format, I suppose?
I mean, one major thing is obviously to diversify the whether you're in what's it called, traditional news, or if you're in entertainment, it doesn't really matter where it is. If that department is undiverse, you're not going to get the right people telling those stories, and that's definitely where we have a lot of problems arising from. If the media is not diverse, we're not learning enough about these different communities and their experiences. But personally, I think there are times when I think journalists, especially if you're freelance, should know when it's not for them to talk about a topic. It's not for them to speak about something. On the other hand, if you're doing a report and you're making sure that the voices in that report are all from one singular community that you're talking about, I think that's okay too. But I think it's just, we just need to make the news needs to be more mindful and more inclusive in general. And so I think it's like steps at every kind of stage in the newsroom, really, that need to be more diversified and more inclusive. Yeah, that's my opinion.
I also think, as well as diversifying newsrooms, also looking after the people once they're in there, because you also have a lot of, we've hired a brown person and a woman, so that we've ticked our boxes, and then they do an article and I don't know, it goes viral for like the wrong reasons, and they get thrown under the bus, and then the editors don't look after them, and it just becomes a horrendous experience. Like, I know a few people that freelancers that's happened to, especially with like opinion articles, because they love to go after the controversy. So I think once you've got those people in the newsrooms, or you're commissioning more people of color, or women, or anyone that's of marginalized identity, you need to have the infrastructure and the policies in place to make sure that they're also looked after. Otherwise, there is no point in them being there, because the actual system hasn't changed.
Yeah, I think if your question is about how do we kind of prevent, certain groups or voices being like tokenized whenever an issue comes up or something like that, I think this kind of goes back to, I think something that's been like touched on before in this talk. Like, there is a tendency obviously I agree that people representative of certain communities should be the primary point of call to tell like their own stories, especially if they're people who aren't very well represented in news in general. It's like I was saying, that I know very many journalists of color who will report on certain things specific to their communities that intersect with other issues than race, that are things like, I don't know, music, sport, culture, business, whatever, but they're only ever categorized as a voice talking about race or racial reporting. It's like myself, for example, like I cover a lot of things that impact the Black community or talk about like Black culture, but I'm only ever asked to speak about things related to reporting on race. And this is what I'm saying in terms of the issue of only calling on people when it's those kind of specific categories, rather than seeing that, they're very, very versatile, can cover a lot of things. And, and this is, I guess, gets to the root of the problem, like reporting on certain communities from like, for example, reporting on music and race or something. You're just reporting on music in the way that, a reporter who's not of color might be doing, but it's never really seen that way. It's always very much politicized. And I think that because it's politicized so much, it's not seen as regular news. It's not seen as something that can be on, like prime time. It's not something that can be seen on like our kind of everyday news cycles. And that's in turn what makes people kind of see us to be kind of picked whenever there's only these kind of issues that come up. So I think there's the onus on, you know, people running newsrooms to be seeing, you know, us as reporters as not just people reporting on race, reporting on everyday life that should be taken as normal in the way that other people are, if that makes sense, basically.
Yeah, I was just gonna say as well, like I totally agree with both of you guys, and Shahed, what you said about opinion pieces, and it's funny how when you write an opinion piece about race, you're, you know, definitely at the front line of, you know, being in that firing line for racist trolls, because you're centering a piece around yourself and your experiences. But the funny thing is, even though that's always gonna, I've done like reports where this at the heart of the story, you know, it's got to do with racism really, and racist institutions, but because it's a report, I haven't really had as much backlash for me personally. I mean, there always is something, but the funny thing is that editors across newsrooms, they do tend to only, literally like what Christine said, they want people of color for their stories of trauma a lot of the time, and so I think a lot of the you know, female journalists of color that I know, they start off writing about their trauma, and it's actually something that definitely needs to be unpicked more. Like, why is it that so many, definitely we should get these voices out more, but I find that a lot of people who maybe want to go into journalism down another route always find themselves having to come back to talking about their trauma and talking about racism and their own personal experiences. And it's definitely something that I've decided I'm not going to write opinion pieces anymore. I'm not an opinion writer. I'm a reporter. I'm an investigative reporter, and I'm not just going to do it to get the bylines. And that the issue is that for some papers at the beginning when I was freelancing, I wouldn't get the byline if I wanted to write a report. But as soon as I said I want to talk about you know, this racist experience I had, or I want to talk about Islamophobia, or I want to talk about this or that, they want you there. And it's not enough, because also opinion pieces aren't paid as well. You don't usually, you know, there's less jobs doing that, and I have a lot of respect for writers who do end up just wanting to do entirely opinion pieces. That is definitely a craft in itself, but it's not what I want to do. And it's funny that it took me a long time to be able to kind of take myself out of that. Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there while we were talking about those topics.
And the thing that I wanted to add, just from what I've heard there as well, is that, you know, and it doesn't just have to be specifically newsrooms here as well, that we're just talking about the industry as a whole here as well, though. Do you think that there's an issue with the industry and leadership here as well, though? You know, the know-how, or maybe the understanding that there needs to be within the industry as well. So I suppose I'm asking about leadership, you know, having an understanding around these topics and issues, not tokenizing it, like you said, and what steps can be taken to maybe start, you know, driving that change within the industry. A threefold question almost.
Yeah, I'd say that for me, it's an obvious yes, in my opinion. I think that, you know, I've been on like panels before kind of thing and spoken about the issue in that a lot, because more readers, I think, because more viewers are making like a lot of noise about the fact that, you know, certain stories aren't being covered, certain communities aren't being included. There is a push from, you know, like major newsrooms or organizations, or for example, me looking at like the entertainment sector, like magazines who I know that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago it's rare that they have a black artist doing R&B or something like that, or a you know, an Asian artist doing, you know, DJing or anything like that, or any of those kind of things, to be on like the cover of their magazine was just almost, it was like unspokenly unheard of, more or less. And now you see people kind of switch in that way, but that inclusion that people are kind of pressing for because they know that it's going to get them readers, it's not necessarily handled very well. A lot of the times you see topics or concepts that, you know, journalists of color have been covering accurately for years, just, you know, completely manhandled and just really badly communicated in you know, in current reporting, which is very, very poor. And I think that that's something that I see a lot. I think, and I've said before, I think that the way forward around that, I tend to kind of pay my, my attention in terms of as a reader, as much as a writer as well, is to kind of contribute to publications that I know are better in terms of who have always been doing this work, as opposed to people who are jumping on it as a trend and then getting it wrong and having to post like retractions and all that sort of thing. I think that there's as much as, and again, it goes back to what we're saying about, diversifying and that sort of thing. But for me, it's like, I'd rather give my credit as a reader or my attention as a reader to, those magazines or those zines or those smaller publications who are doing that work and already covering these topics in ways that are progressive and accurate, rather than a big publication, that can't even get, the most basic of terms right, in my opinion.
I'm just going to remind myself of the question about leadership. Yeah, I think especially in the journalism that I do, I think the editors at the top play a huge role in the decisions that they make, and even in the editing process. Like I've been on the receiving end on editing processes where you've had a piece edited to the point where you're like, this doesn't even read how I've written it. So stuff like that, I think it goes to the top, especially in kind of your major news publications, the stuff that I write for. They need to, it's just a question of people at the top either not knowing or just not caring enough to actually do something about it. It's about, I mean, I'd say they're not even uneducated, because I think they are. And it's not even, it's kind of like this strange ignorance that they have, and they only kind of pick up on it when it becomes a bit more trendy, like with Black Lives Matter or something else. I can't remember what else happened this year, but these huge events that they're like, oh, we need to cover these things now, and let's reach out to these journalists. But then throughout the rest of the year, these editors will either just completely ignore you, or they'll make these mistakes. I'm like, oh well, we need to learn. It's like, well, it's been like quite a few decades now, and we can't keep saying that we need to learn when the people at the top definitely either need to change, or we need to make sure the diversity reaches right to the top.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to add really anything new because you guys have covered it, but from working across quite a few like national newsrooms, I mean, we all knew, I think everyone here has heard that statistic. It's like the newsrooms are 96% white and 55% male, but that was from 2016. And since then, there's been these diversity schemes, there's been these big pushes, there's been these commitments to diversity. But then I'm here in these like newsrooms that I really had always wanted to join, and I'm hearing that it's diverse, and I'm telling you these buildings, because usually if you're working especially with a like national publication, there's lots of different publications in the same building, you don't see other people that look like you. It's actually crazy that there's this push for diversity, but I'm like the editors, they're not diverse. There's such a long way to go, and this is across online, this is radio, this is television. Everywhere I've gone, I've just been more and more shocked and disappointed at how undiverse that top the decision makers are. And at the end of the day, you might have this really talented Black or Asian journalist who's the reporting face or a presenting face, but working in production and learning how you kind of produce an item and a news piece, you really realize that they don't make the decisions at the end of the day, and the people who are actually like the editors and stuff like that, they're not diverse. So I mean, I can't exactly remember what your question was, but in terms of like leadership, I know from first-hand experience, that is the one place where it feels like it's unmovable, it's unchanging. So really, I want to see a change in that, because we're seeing more covers, we're seeing more interviewees, and we're seeing they're touching on these topics, but they're not changing the industry, and that's why we're having the same mistakes kind of reproduced through the media, I would say.
I'm sorry, Christine, go on. I'll stop.
I wanted to add as well, I think like 100% like agree with like what's been said like by pretty much everyone. And also I would want to say that I think we maybe need to if over time, like, because we you know, we've been having this conversation for what, decades now about, oh, how are we going to diversify, how are we going to do this, how are we going to do all this about, like, you know, major news. I'm just saying that I think that at this point in time, people might want to be looking away from who are traditionally seen as leaders within, like, the news and entertainment industry, because really, if we're looking at, you know, news that's come out over the past, like, year or year before that, it's not necessarily award-winning stories or the big, you know, big funded BBC, you know, or these massive institutions who are doing the best reporting on race. It's individuals who are working their way up in smaller places. It's, you know, Galvan's and a lot of great stuff on reporting. For me as a musician, if I'm looking for someone that's doing, like, some of the most cutting edge stuff on, like, I don't know, techno or you know, or electronic genres, it's places like Dweller Forever, which is like this small independent you know, organization coming out of the US run by Black writers. That they're who I would see, or I would refer to, or I would promote as leaders in terms of what they're doing in terms of their coverage. But that's not how it's seen by a lot of readership, a lot of people inside the industry. So I think that it's about time that people need to be giving more due to people who have always been doing the work, regardless of whether they're in big news, rather than, you know, consistently waiting on these big institutions to change themselves. Not that they shouldn't, they absolutely should, but rather than doing that, I'd rather be giving my time, my resources, my energy as a reader and a writer towards places that are doing the work to be more diverse, or to get, or to be more accurate in their coverage that's relevant to people like me, rather than consistently looking to people and having this conversation again and again, because it's part of those issues that cause a bit of this imbalance, in that we're not really giving, you know, the due that we should be giving to people who have been doing this work, I think.
Yeah, no, those are all kind of like really, really good points actually as well, though. And you know, the leadership thing was kind of like just to start in terms of just getting an understanding of probably where we're at as an industry. And I think, you know, I'm looking at it from kind of like two sides here as well. That having worked in, well, newsrooms for almost, oh God, I think 15 years, and then also on the journalism lecture side of things as well. The one of the things that seems to come back to me is that, you know, you'll get, you know, kind of like a, you know, a black student or an Asian student or whoever it might be that might come up to me and say that, you know, it's really good to see you here, because then it gives us a bit of kind of like, you know, hope that we can make it. Not that it should be like that, but then it gives you a bit of an understanding of what the landscape, I suppose, is like as well. They're not just within kind of like, you know, journalism as a whole, but I suppose even the teaching of it really as well. So just touching back on what you've just said there as well, though, I suppose if you had one thing that you could maybe come up with that would maybe instigate or drive that change within the industry, just one thing, doesn't matter what it is, what would it be? Because I think one of the things you've just mentioned there as well is that, and we don't even have to use the term leaders, because I totally get where you're coming from, Christine, with that as well. If we're talking about the people that are making these decisions, they're not necessarily representative of, well, for example, the group that we're in here, you know, just between the four of us as well. So again, if there was one thing that you would change, what would it be within industry, you know, like now?
I can go first if so I would, I guess, relevant to what I just said, I would redirect the funding and the resourcing and the readership, if I could, towards some of these smaller independent platforms who are doing way better than some of the biggest, like, well-funded news organizations in like this country. That's what I would immediately do, and help them get their word out there more, or have because a lot of the issues that, you know, some of these platforms have, it's not that their reporting isn't good, it's not that they're you know, they're not working hard to get their stuff out. A lot of the problem is resources. You know, it's easier for a big, you know, platform that's you know, that's not necessarily going to be as good in its coverage on race or racial issues or certain communities, to get a lot of major backing or major funding, than a small, you know, all these small independent zines or offshoots or you know, platforms that we've seen, like, coming up over the past, like, I don't know, 5-10 years. So that's what I would do, rather than looking internally to those places. I would say, okay, let's give some of the help to people who it would be in much better hands, I think.
Well, I mean, so many things that I would want to change about the industry, but I think one thing that would need a miracle to kind of change it is actually kind of decentering it around the Western kind of spheres. I think obviously I'm in maybe a different industry to Christine, so the thing with with working in kind of current affairs and like long form investigations is that you want it to be picked up by the major news outlets, which I can't unfortunately change, you know, where they are, and so as much as I would want to fund smaller smaller news organizations, that I know that if I get my story out to the bigger ones, then at least it will be, you know, seen and maybe even acted upon. And I think one thing that I hate about the industry is that I will find I'll find like a really good story, or what I personally think is a good story, and I've been told by, you know, even editors, oh, it's a brilliant story, but it's just not relevant. It's just not relevant to the UK. It's just not relevant to wherever, and you know, it's actually something that I've spoken to, because in the long term I would love to be a foreign correspondent. I've spoken to some kind of international reporters, and they've said even if you're based in India and you're reporting on a certain topic and it's too kind of like it's too much about Asia and it's not kind of taking in that kind of Western perspective of the news, it won't necessarily always be picked up. And I just think, yeah, just kind of making it less Western centric across the board. I think that's what I would change personally.
I massively agree with both of you on both those points. And I would add, as somebody who lives in the north and somebody who wants to write about politics a lot, I would change the fact that especially political journalism is really Westminster bubble London vibes, and it just doesn't work, because those, especially like with the recent elections, the people reporting on like Hartlepool or like the north of England or even Scotland, they're getting things wrong, and it's, if they wouldn't get those things wrong if they just pass the mic to people like me or anybody else like living in local regional areas. That's another way that I would think would probably change industry diversity wise, because it's very London centric, and it completely just neglects the whole local regional journalism, which mostly does a lot of the breaking news stories. And then obviously, you know, the bigger outlets pick it up and then they've taken that kind of breaking news, whereas actually somewhere like the Manchester Mill broke some news like the other week, and a bigger paper picked it up and kind of not stole it, but they didn't credit it. So
just got a question here from Nudity as well. They've just got it on the group chat, but it's one that's basically come up kind of like time and again, even, you know, whilst I've been doing it, even before that as well. They almost get told it, should I say, as a child as well, you know. And well, when I was told, it was a case of kind of like, you know, you've got to work, you know, twice as hard to get half of what everyone else almost gets as well, which is what I'm kind of like surmising to. So Udity's, you know, question here is, you know, well, how do you deal with kind of like burnout in the industry, and also kind of like, you know, how to also avoid having to work doubly hard, you know, just to make that mark?
Well, what I would say is that I definitely find that the kind of journalists of colour that I speak to definitely do feel as though they need to work double as hard, and it's a shame that that's still perceived that way. But one thing that isn't really said enough, and this is about, you know, people from more privileged backgrounds. One of the reasons why they are successful is because of the fact that they've established a network in obviously the industry in the areas that they want to break into. And and I think something that I've learned as I've gotten older is that there's such amazing talent in our own communities, and one of the best ways to kind of, so a way to kind of skip that double working, hard working night shifts. I've done it all. I've done it myself, and I burnt myself out, and I know what it feels like. And then I kind of realized something that I could have done rather than working so hard by myself is really getting more into that community of these young talented writers from my community, and creating our own networks, because as they are moving upwards, I'm seeing some of my friends who were just freelance writers, writing, maybe getting one piece every 6 months, not really making a career out of it, and now they're doing brilliant things. I've got friends in the BBC, I've got friends in all these different kind of places, and that one of the reasons why we feel like we need to work double as hard is because we don't have those initial connections, but kind of forming that base level, I think, is something that people don't talk about enough. I've gone to a lot of talks and they don't say, I know that all three of us, I think, are in one group chat together, and even though I don't use it enough, that has really helped me. Like some days I'll just message on this, there are chats, by the way, for anyone who's listening, and like groups that you can join for young journalists of colour, and just journalists, working class journalists, and female journalists, or non-binary journalists. There are those groups, and I would say join those groups, speak to people who understand what it's like, because this industry is different to other industries. It's hard, but something that they kind of no one can take away from you is creating that community, and talent will always shine through, I think, but just making sure that you're part of that base level of keeping that talent strong, keeping them in the industry. Just don't give up, and together you will be like the next generation. And that's kind of how I think, for me, it's the only way that we can avoid it. And I know that doesn't sound connected to burnout, but for me it's helped me just kind of, I feel like I don't have to work as hard now, which sounds silly, but because I'm speaking more to other journalists of colour that I didn't know at the time when I was starting off. So yeah, that's my piece of advice.
I would also add that networking and connections is hugely important, especially for people from marginalised identities. Like you said, we're all part of the same group chat, and you don't always have to be active in it, but you just pop in. People will read a pitch, stuff like that. And also there's like tips that you wouldn't have been able to find out. Like people from privileged backgrounds, they talk about nepotism and stuff, but it is very much a real thing. They've been able to, I don't know, do the best masters or be able to do these really great internships that don't pay, and be able to learn skills that maybe someone like me who hasn't studied journalism hasn't been able to pick up, but has been able to do it through things like networking and talking to other people, which has definitely helped with burnout. But yeah, burnout's definitely something that I've literally, it happened to me like a couple of months ago, and I had to stop working for a bit. And yeah, we all have to, it's a shame we have to work double. It's hard. And as Shayma said, I've also realized that networking has made me not work as hard, because you've got that kind of group. I would also say boundaries is a good one, especially as a freelancer. I ended up working, ridiculous hours to get stuff done, and I've realized that actually if I just work typical working hours, then it kind of works a bit more. I've been full-time freelancing, I think, for 6 months now. And yeah, boundaries is a big one for burnout. Otherwise, yeah, you just end up going through this weird cycle of burnout, then being okay, then burnout, and that's not a way to work or live.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what the other panelists have said 100%. So I'm similar in that I never didn't do any internships, didn't do any masters, didn't pay for any of those things. Like that, this is an industry particularly that I've noticed from the beginning when I started really encourages people to be used and trampled over by massive corporations for very little money, very little payout, and almost will sell it to you as if like, oh yeah, you have to do this or else you won't get anywhere. Like you have to pay or do that. It's just like, obviously it's not saying that you don't have to work, you do have to work harder, but at the end of the day, like this kind of burnout, it's not something that I myself have massively feel that I've experienced, because I think that I was lucky that from the beginning, like even before I really started, I just happened to work with some publications, again, one's very much rooted in communities of color that were very helpful towards letting me kind of wisen up to the fact that I do not have to be trampled all over to make a career for myself. Working with people like having a lot of networks, people like Black Ballad was great for me as like, a black woman who's writing, so many of the connections I've met through there, people are very, especially journalists of color who know that they're very underrepresented in the industry and want to help you forward. You know, they have been the main point of call for me in kind of wising up to the fact that you don't have to be trampled over, and anybody who's telling you that you have to, like, they do not have your best interests at heart at all. Like, it's not a thing. You don't have to be doing it. So I would say that, again, like it's been said before, but it is a thing of really do network. Like, you know, people are very, especially in the journalism industry, like a lot of, you know, journalists I know, journalists of color, Black journalists, Black women who are journalists, like they've been very, I can just DM them, they'll help me out, you know, they'll you know, sort of things for me, they'll network for me, put me in touch with other people. They've been a very good lifeline for me in my own career. So I'm saying that, you know, I mean, I can even say for myself, like I'm open to be, you know, message, DM, whatever, if people need help, assistance. I'm sure other people are too. It's a thing of that. And I would say as well, a big part of the burnout aspect is related to, you know, the financials and related to kind of knowing the ins and outs of your rights as a worker, your rights as a, because, you know, journalism as an industry in general is not great for people's individual working rights, or people's like how people are saying, like boundaries over working, or boundaries over you know, making sure that rates are good for what you're doing, that you're getting the most out of the work that you're putting in. It's a major issue. So I'd say as well, there are a lot of, you know, really good resources, like podcast. There's one that I've read, that I've listened to, that is based in America, I believe. It's called the Writers Room podcast, run by a Asian American journalist and I believe a white journalist too. But again, does talk about this topic, talks about a lot of things in terms of the financials, you know, the legal side of it, making sure that you can negotiate more, which is a big thing in terms of freelancing, negotiating your time, negotiating your energy that you're putting into the work, and you know, just those things that people really do need in place, that it's hard to get to know about that without the networking aspect. You know, nobody really teaches you that. And again, it's people who do have better connections, do have more privilege, which have a better chance of getting those things put together for them. So I really, really strongly say to people, like, if you can, before you even start, be thinking about, like, how are you going to make sure that this lifestyle works for you, that you're not exploited? Because you know, that helped me in my career, because I never really felt, you know, that I was burning out, kind of thing. And I would strongly recommend to other people, you know, find those kind of tools, that network, those things that you can employ to make sure that you know, you're not treated in the way that you should be treated, basically.
I would just quickly say, like, you're so right, because just one thing that I think, when you're a young journalist, you feel as though you need to catch up, maybe, or you need to get a lot of things done all at once, because unfortunately one of the ways that we kind of get noticed as journalists is by putting that stuff out there on social media, and then you have this whole comparison thing going on, and that's something that I've really tried to remove myself from recently. But I realized, like, when I have been burnt out, there's been two reasons, literally what Christine said. One, not having enough money, and that's because I've been doing free work for different places, thinking that I need to, like, you know, get these things hit on my CV, or these experiences done, and I didn't really need them in the end. Or two, because I was doing work that I didn't actually enjoy, and therefore I was doing other stuff that I really loved on the side. And so I think what you need to do is kind of, like, if you ever feel like you're burning out, because as journalists, I think we do often do a lot of things at once, take a step back, look at what you're doing, what your responsibilities are right now, and think, like, what do I actually love doing? What do I actually want to do? What are my end goals? And stick doing those things, and cut out everything else. And if things aren't paying you, you need to know when to leave. And literally, as Christine said, this industry can exploit people. So you have, like, one thing I would love to say to young journalists is know your worth, and know when it's time to step away. But yeah, that last bit was just repeating Christine, really.
And then just what I want to do is just talking around some of the subject areas that we've covered, and specifically when we're talking about race, culture, and social issues as well. Though I want to just want to get you to expand on some of the work that you're doing right now, and some of the stories and topics that you've covered, areas of interest as well. So I suppose if you can just tell us a bit about some of the things that you're doing, some of the things that you're working on, and how maybe young journalists coming up might be able to get into that particular kind of line of work as well.
I can go first this time. So the stuff I've been working on recently is mostly to do with two areas. So I've either been looking at Islamophobia in general, in politics, and also like in wider society. And I write a lot about the hostile environment and the Home Office's immigration policies. So those are the two areas that I've been looking at in the past few months, I think. And how to get into that. I guess with the Home Office and I guess generally government issues, the thing I would say is make sure you read up on it. I read government documents and policies every day, and also make sure you're kind of connecting and following with people who are already doing that work. So kind of your charities and like the migrant organizations who've been doing the work for decades, and kind of connecting with them, and making sure that you're on top of any breaking developments or any new policies that they're talking about. Like I got a press release this morning about something to do with new detention policies that are coming into effect next month. So yeah, I would say networking again is a big one, but not just networking with journalists, but networking with people who are in that field already doing the work, or any field really. It doesn't have to be the hostile environment. Any field that you're wanting to write about or look into, I would say make sure you're following things on social media. You're signed up to mailing lists. You're emailing people. Asking them to maybe even have a coffee. I mean, when we can have a coffee and or have a Zoom meeting. So yeah, I would say networking, and also make sure you're really read up on what you want to write about, so you can report on things and write about things in the best possible way.
Oh, okay. I'll go next. So I'm doing a couple of things right now. I've been working on an investigation for like months now. It's actually making me quite exhausted thinking about it. And it's actually about the Rohingya community in Bradford, who are the largest group of these refugees in Europe. And kind of how I got started on that investigation was really at the heart of what my interests are, which does kind of circle around race and culture and social issues, but really the communities that are kind of unheard, they're untold stories. So I just had a little think about some of the kind of groups of people that I found really interesting, and who I hadn't heard much of, especially in the UK. And once I figured out where these Rohingyas were, and they're based in Bradford, as I said, it's a really massive community but never reported on. I just took a train up there and just got to speaking with them, and it ended up being this like massive investigation that is connected to like Bangladesh, which is where a lot of them have migrated to before coming here, and Myanmar and what's going on there, obviously, which is their home countries. So yeah, I think those are the kind of stories that I work on and that I'm interested in. They can take a long time, so really the only way to kind of speed up these stories is to just keep speaking to the communities that you're trying to work within. Really like lay down your sources, make sure that they want to speak to you, and that that this is a story that they really want to get out there, and that will give you that urgency, and that is, as well as that patience, especially if you're doing like long form investigations. You've got to be super patient, and there's no instant gratification. That's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, and for myself, so kind of a lot of things going on at the moment. Disclaimer though, honestly, I don't see myself as massively reporting on race and social issues. I said before I joined the talk actually, but it is mainly around music, culture, entertainment. So a lot of artist interviews at the moment that I have kind of coming out in the next couple of weeks. Let me think. Yes, some like scene pieces where I'm looking at like, okay, like these trends that are going on musically that are happening. Some mainly things around that. So yeah, I do tend to cover like Black artists and artists of color, or the primary people I tend to cover, not exclusively, but that tends to be who I'm mainly asked to do, which I guess is another problem we can talk about. But I'm also working on something book related as well. And I'd say for people who want to get into those kind of industries. Okay, so, well, yeah, one thing I would say is that definitely you have to, it's not investigative necessarily at all, but like you have to be able to do a bit of digging. Like it can be quite hard to find out who somebody's, you know, the way that you get to interview an artist is usually to finding out like their agent or their PR or somebody like that, you know, and it's not always widely available, but if you have the right, you can find it. I would say as well, have an idea of, you know, be aware of music, listen to it kind of thing, listen to, you know, the scenes that you want to cover or the genres that you want to cover. That's kind of a prerequisite. You have to have some kind of interest, hopefully. I would say as well, it's good to have an idea of artists' music release cycles. So for example, I find in my experience with most people who work on music and entertainment, the most press that you tend to get around like an artist or a TV show or a film or something is usually going to be pinned to whenever it's going to be released. So if an artist has released an album, they want stories on it the day of, like the week after. They just want, you know, people to be talking about the album that particular time. So if you have the foresight, or if you know, or if you can see that some stories are coming out, or that you see news reports, oh, okay, this artist has this thing coming out, like jump on it. Like you have to be quite proactive in thinking about that. You know, make sure that you're that's usually what interview or story, like it's good to do that. Also, you know, be familiar with kind of what editors like, what, you know, what kind of publications, you know, will lean towards certain artists and what, and, you know, because for example, there are some, I would say as well that if you're doing music reporting, a lot of the time it's quite easier to work your way up if you start doing, you know, freelancing or working for a publication that maybe are more likely to interview artists who are at the beginning of their career. So there are some publications who don't really do that. But, you know, some like, it's like Mixed Mag, like Clash magazine, like, you know, some of those ones that are very much more like underground artists that, yeah, that might be a good place. That, you know, Trench Mag as well, you know, those are places that are great for doing artists that are very early career who, you know, if you're an early career journalist, it might be most likely what you're allowed to get. But obviously don't, you know, don't not shoot high. Like I happened to shoot high very early on when I was doing music reporting. That works out really great for me. In terms of the book related things, well, it's easier to do that if you have an agent, but that's something that is used. It can be quite difficult to get an agent quite early on. So, but I would say, yeah, like practice, like writing, practice, you know, that kind of thing. And usually, like once you get maybe a bit further in terms of journalism, that, you know, people can start reaching out to you in the way that like they have with me, kind of thing. But yeah, that's for the music related stuff. Also for the entertainment related stuff, I would say that's usually the easiest route to go down if that is helpful.
Right, brilliant. Well, thanks very much as well. So we've almost come pretty much to the end of our time as well, though. So I think just to round off, and like I said, it doesn't have to be specific to either, well, any of the areas as well. But if you had one bit of advice for up and coming journalists when it comes to reporting on race, culture, and social issues, just one bit of advice, what would it be?
I would say, as Christine just said, don't be afraid to shoot your shot. Just because you don't have any bylines or, you know, any official bylines, especially if you're doing freelance commissions, like the editors don't necessarily always pick up on that. Like when I first started out, my first byline was Huffington Post, and an editor took a chance on me, and I had no bylines to show. And I think I had like a writing example to show, and that was about it. So I'd say, yeah, don't be afraid to shoot your shot. Like you could pitch to the Guardian, and they might take it if your pitch and idea is good. It doesn't really matter if you're not, don't know, like an official journalist, as they say. Yeah, but you said that would be my advice.
My piece of advice would be just to make sure that you're really writing about stuff that you care about, because I mean, you can obviously start writing about things that you're not that interested in, but as long as you're really invested in a story and you really care about it, that will give you the perseverance to dig deeper, to get under the story, and to get those lines that other people have missed. And that's where you kind of are able to convince editors to publish those pieces. Or if you want it to be on radio and television, again, it's just about really loving that story, really dissecting it, and finding kind of the gems underneath. And same thing, like I had no bylines, and I didn't even say that. I just said, I've got this story, I would love to write this for you, and a national paper ended up picking it up. So it's really about just getting that story, I think, and investing in it.
Yeah, this is probably like a combination of what Shayma and Shahed have just said anyway, and it's going to sound like so cliche, but I'm saying that it's amazing the amount of young like journalists of color, or like black journalists, because that's who I tend to meet primarily, who like they just don't like believe in themselves. I'm like, you actually have to believe in yourself, like, because like we were saying before, like a lot of the people covering these same stories that you want to cover at a big publication, they don't know anything about it. Like they know less about it than you do. Like they're not from the community. They've never like it's like, I'll give you an example of music, like the music genre drill. Okay, now it's just gone #1. Okay, like we've had like the first drill song that's gone #1. Like years ago when this was a new bubbling thing, like people at these publications didn't know what they were talking about. Okay, and it was, these young journalists, all these independent publications that were doing the work and actually covering it correctly. And this is why I'm saying, like, you have to have self-belief. Like you have to shoot your shot in that way, you need to believe that you should be there, and you should, because a lot of people are there, they don't know what they're doing. So I'm saying that it's really important to make sure, because this is an industry, like I was saying before, I really encourage people to not believe that they're worth, being paid accurately, having their time managed accurately, that they should be walked all over. And it's not the truth. Like it really is not the truth. So I'm saying, and it was like, it was the same thing for me when I started out. I got a very, prominent byline at the Fader when I was very early career, hadn't done any music interviews before pretty much ever. It's these things, they're not massively unheard of. Like these can happen for you. So I'm saying that you need to believe that you should be in certain places and you need to go for it, basically. That's what I'm saying.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that bit as well, because I was writing some of those key points down. And I know that Shahed and you, Christine, earlier said it, and I've got it. Don't be afraid to shoot your shot. Yeah, I was going to message you guys privately and go, what was it that you just said as well? But thanks very much as well, though, because I said, like, just mindful of time, and we have reached the end of this session. So big thanks here from the SPA and from everyone in the group here to Shayma, Christine, and Shahed as well, though. Thank you very much for your time. And just a quick note for everyone as well, that we've got the SPA Awards coming up on YouTube later today at 7 o'clock, so do join us for that. But once again, a big thanks to the panel. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.